Sir,
Yes, sir.
please open your video or sharing something. Okay, sir. Uh, Muhammad Shibili,
Sir?
can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Okay, please start. Sandhi teacher,
Okay, sir.
Sandhi teacher, Sandhi
Hello,
teacher.
sir.
Okay, okay, okay.
Yes, sir. Yes,
So,
yes,
okay,
yes.
okay, okay. So, Shivili, please start.
Okay, sir. Good afternoon, all of you. Today we are going to start our second technical session of national webinar in the banner of 75 Azadika Amrit Mahotsav, sponsored by ICSSR Southern Regional Center, Hyderabad. So we are discussing about the topic Kerala Freedom Struggle, Memorable Events and Darkness of Colonialism, conducted by Department of History, University College. So this session handled by two resource persons, Dr. GSP Prasad sir and Dr. Malavika Binni ma'am. So I kindly invite Dr. Sandhya Jain as Assistant Professor of History Department, University College, to welcome our resource person, Dr. GSP Prasad sir. Please, ma'am. Ma'am.
Sandhi teacher.
Hello, sir.
Okay,
Okay.
please start.
Am I audible?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
Okay,
It is.
sir. Thank you for your invitation. And this is the second technical session of our national webinar. And welcome you all. First of all, it's my duty to welcome our resource person, Dr. GSP Prasad, who is presently doing his work. He is the Assistant Professor of History in the National Defense Academy of Pune. And before that, he had worked as the head of the Department of History at Jawaharlal Nehru Rajagiya Mahavidyalaya. And also, he was the assistant master of history in Rashtriya Military School, Belgaum. And now he is the history assistant professor in the National Defense Academy. And he had secured his PhD in modern history from Dravidian University of Andhra Pradesh. And on behalf of the webinar, national webinar, and on behalf of the Department of History, University College, I welcome you, sir, for this function. Thank you.
May I start, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Sandhya, ma'am, thank you very much. Mohammed, thank you very much. I take this opportunity to thank Suresh sir for having me invited for the talk. I feel honored to be part of this national webinar. For not wasting much of our time, I would like to get into the topic. The topic that has been selected by the college has been outstanding, in fact. The darkness of colonialism. Before I start my PPT, I would like to tell that nowadays we are much into criticizing Mughal period a lot. The new narrative has started that the just injustice that have been done during Mughal period are highlighted now. But for that matter, in ancient and medieval regimes across the world, since they are not democratic governments, they are all monarchical governments, dictatorial governments. So king had their own say. But why outrightly only Mughals have been isolated and they are targeted? A lot of damage was done to Indian economy, Indian society, Indian culture, everything that of India. It's because of the British, because of the colonial intervention in Indian society. We lost everything. But unfortunately, we tend to forget, or we don't know. We forgot that what colonialism, the injustice that has been done. So, in this perspective, it is interesting to know that you have selected this topic for the webinar, and I'm very fortunate that I'm part of this webinar. Not wasting our time, I'm going to present my topic. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. This is my topic: Darkness of Colonialism, an account of transportation and punishment in penal Andaman. Generally, when we talk about colonialism, what comes to our mind is colonial rulers exploited our economy. That was their main motive. Exploitation of economy is their main motive. That was the reason all the way from thousands of kilometers they came to India and exploited their our economy, and till 1947 they ruled over us. But if you look at the methodology, the weapons, or various systems they had used in exploiting their economy, one of such systems is the transportation and establishment of penal colonies. Not a lot of research has been done in this perspective, at least in India. Works have been done, no doubt, but this is one area that is generally neglected when we talk about colonial exploitation of British exploitation of Indian colony. Generally, this is one aspect we generally tend to forget. Since I have done my research on this topic, as well as I stayed in Andamans for about 3 years as a part of my job, that subsequently made me to work on this topic. So I had a very first-hand experience about the people over there, about the tribes over there, and I happened to visit the cellular jail many a times. And I was the member of the cellular jail preserving committee also. That was the reason I got first-hand experience, and I was able to work on this topic. So I have divided my topic into 9 parts. It's with introduction about colonialism. I think previous scholars also must have spoken about colonialism. I would not much dwell into that. Then the concept of transportation. What does transportation mean, and what are penal colonies? What do they mean? And Andaman and Nicobar Islands, the present status of Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Then we'll get into how Andaman emerged as a penal colony. Then the establishment of open jail as well as cellular jail after 1857 revolt, what changes that took place in Andaman after 1857, and the construction of cellular jail, of course, and the methods of punishment, what kind of punishments were given to the people over there, and how these convicts who were jailed there, how they resisted, what was the reaction, that we will discuss. And finally, we'll end up this topic by how this transportation colony, how this penal Andaman was closed. With that, we'll complete this topic. Generally, everybody knows, I'm sure most of you are students here, everybody knows what is colonialism. It is an ideology, it is a system in which one country tries to dominate, politically control another country with a sole aim of economic exploitation. So, in this process, what happened while exploiting a colony, the mother country, the metropolis, in our case, it is England was our metropolis. It imposed a relationship. It is a unilaterally imposed relationship over the colony. In this process, the Britishers or metropolis, they impose their religion, their language, their culture, their cultural practices, their traditions, because the political dominance could continue only when we are psychologically, when we are culturally controlled. That is the reason colonialism involves not just economic exploitation. No doubt, it is economic exploitation. Ultimate aim of the metropolis is economically exploit us. But at the same time, in order to pursue their goal, they need to control us from every perspective, every angle. That was British was successful in doing so till 1947. So in 1931, British famous historian in his younger age, in 1930s, Will Durant, he happened to visit India while writing about the civilizations of the world. But after coming to India, he realized that the colonial exploitation, how it was going on in India, and he made a statement. This I have taken from Era of Darkness, written by Shashi Tharoor. I have taken this Will Durant statement. He says the British conquest of India was the invasion and destruction of a high civilization by a trading company, utterly without scruple or principle, careless of art and greedy of gain, overrunning with fire and sword, a country temporarily disordered and helpless, bribing and murdering, annexing and stealing, and beginning that career of illegal and legal. And in the name of legalities, also they plundered, which has now gone on ruthlessly for 173 years. See how nicely he explained in 2 3 sentences about how colonialism exploited India as a whole. Similarly, supported by this statement, Shashi Tharoor says India, that is British East India Company, conquered India that was no primitive or barren land. Like Britishers, for that matter, Europeans, they conquered the world territories. But most of them are backward, barren lands, primitive lands. But in case of India, it was not like that. By the time British came to India, India was already well-developed economy. Well-developed economy. When in the beginning of 18th century, the India share in world economy was about 23%. But by the time British left, just it was 3%. That shows you must have seen what we call as the Shashi Tharoor's 8-minute speech in Oxford University. There he explains about the nature of colonialism, the colonial practices in India. So what Britain has done, it was a conscious and deliberate breeding of India, was the greatest crime in all history. In the history of the world, in history of the mankind, this was the greatest crime that was uh, carried out by one country against another country. So now let us come to our area of topic, that is transportation and penal colonies. Transportation is basically transporting people from one land to another land, a newly discovered land, because in newly discovered land you need manpower to develop those lands. That is the reason the concept of transportation started. In fact, in India's case, Andaman was a very relatively a new colony. Rather, it was one of the last transportation sites in the world, last penal colonies in the world. Otherwise, transportation and penal colonies started from the beginning of 15th century. Spain and Portugal started, and subsequently all other Europeans became part of this game. And America was a penal colony in the beginning. Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asian countries, these were all established as penal colonies. The people who were migrated, who went there, they were not, they did not go on their own. They were forced to leave. They were forced to leave as indentured labor, or they were forced to leave as robbers. In the name of punishment, they were given punitive punishment of transportation, and they were asked to leave the country and settle themselves in these new places. This is how the concept of transportation started. So these penal colonies could serve an excellent prison for criminals because there was no way to escape if the island was in distant place. Most of the penal colonies are islands. If you go through, most of these penal colonies are islands, are away from their motherland. So it was not possible for a convict, it was not possible for the indentured labor to leave that place, to run away from that place. That is how penal colonies were developed as a part of colonial expansion, as a part of colonial exploitation of colonies. And this basically, it all started with forced labor, indentured labor, and subsequently convicts were sent there. So this transportation actually gave a place to slave economy. Earlier in 13th, 12th, 14th centuries, slave economy was very prevalent, and the slave economy was replaced by transportation. In transportation, initially, Indian youth labor, people who are economically downtrodden, those people were attracted by the plantation work, plantation managers, and these people were taken to distant lands to work there. That is the reason, if you see uh, uh, Mauritius, you take Mauritius, many of the Southeast Asian countries, you take West Indies, you find a lot of people of Indian origin. The reason is all these people at one point of time they were been migrated to those places as indentured labor. That's the reason now we see the descendants of those people in those all those Fiji islands, for example. You have a lot of Indian population, and most of the people, if you look at from southern part of India, most of the people who were forced to migrate to this place were from Tamil Nadu, particularly Barbados in West Indies. You find people of Tamil origin. This is the reason. So, penal colony is basically an integral part of colonial policy. It's one of the weapons of the colonial rulers where penal colonies were established. It helped in many ways for them. So, it was an effective economic mechanism by which They use the state for optimization of exploitation of colonies, thereby maximizing their wealth. Okay. So establishment of penal colonies was not only part of colonial economic policy, but also it was an authoritative administrative mechanism to control the uncontrolled population. That's why I'm telling you, penal colonies have got two different advantages that colonial rulers had foreseen. Number one, the new land could be developed into a viable economic benefits. Number one. Number two, the uncontrolled population in their own home country could be forced by force. They could be taken to this isolated land by keeping them away from their culture, language, kith and kin, and from their very own existence. So the identity of the people who were forced to go to penal colonies, their identity was totally changed. The earlier identity was totally eliminated and they were created with a new identity, that is criminal. They were branded as criminals, as that is how penal colonies were developed. Okay. So America is best example. North America followed by Australia, followed by New Zealand and Southeast Asian countries. I'll show you in the map also. So penal colonies, there are two things involved. Number one, the purpose of establishing penal colony is expansion and consolidation of new territories as a part of imperialistic expansion, as part of colonial expansion. Number two, maintenance of effective internal discipline in the metropolis and colonies. With these anti-social elements, those who are going against the law, when they were forced to leave their motherland and go and work in a penal colony, as a result, what happened? The motherland is secured. There are no law and order issues now because these people were branded as uh, penal labor and they were forced to go to a new land and to work there. So in both ways, two ways, what happened? One, internal discipline could be made better. Number one. Number two, in the penal colony, these people went there and worked for the development of penal colonies. So ultimately, what happened? It is the colonial state that got advantage out of it, exploitation of resources in the newly established colonies, and that led to the vibrant economic growth for metropolis, that is European countries. So this is the sites of transportation from 1415 to 1954. These were the sites of transportation, starting from in every almost all continents you find these sites of transportation. These are all penal colonies, started as penal colonies, and from South Asia, people were. These are the penal colonies in Southeast Asian countries. You take Sumatra, Malaysia, Singapore. All these places were at one point of Malacca. They're all at one point of time penal colonies, and most of the population who were transported here were from India. And New Zealand was a penal colony, Australia was a penal colony, Mauritius was a penal colony where you find a lot of Indian population. Fiji Islands was another example. So the penal colony, and most of these penal colonies were established by Britishers. And the penal colony that is very adjacent to us, very connected to us, is the Andaman Islands, okay, about which we are going to discuss. These are the penal settlements of Southeast Asian countries. All these Malaysia, Indonesia, they were all at one point of time penal colonies. By the time Andaman was established as a penal colony, these transportation sites were well established, well developed. Strong economics were already established here by the time Andaman became a penal colony. So if you look at the percentage population that were transported to penal colonies from Caribbean islands to Gibraltar, Bermuda, uh, Andamans, Mauritius, from by the time from 17th century to by the time World War One took place, around 3,16,000 people were forced to migrate. They were either Indian dual labor or convicts. They were all forced to, against their will, they were forced to migrate to these new lands to develop those new lands. That is how Australia was established. That is how uh, New Zealand was established, and of course, North America. So now let us come to the our area of topic, the theme, that is Andaman and Nicobar Islands. You all may be aware of where it is exactly located, and many people, some people, even educated people, they believe that we need a passport to go to Andamans. Some people ask, is there a different currency in Andamans? but it is not in Andaman is part of Indian territory. Andaman, when you are in Andaman, the rest of India is called as mainland India, and it is one of the union territories, rather largest union territory of India. It is from Madras, from Chennai, from any part of Indian coast. The distance of these islands are around 1200 kilometers. There are ships available to go there, and by flight also you can go there. It's now almost well developed islands. The stretch of these islands from north to south. This is north. The north side you have Andaman group of islands, and in the south Nicobar group of islands. These are Nicobar group of islands. Nicobar group of islands are relatively flatter. Andaman group of islands, the terrain is ups and down, hilly terrain. So it is around the stretch is from top to bottom, from north to south. The stretch is around 700 kilometers, and this group of islands
And in the
have got
south,
572
Nicobar group
islands
of
in
islands.
total,
These are Nicobar
out of which
group of islands.
38
Nicobar
islands are
group of islands
habitated.
are
Only
relatively
in 38
flatter.
islands people are staying. Out of 38, 26 are in Andaman group and 12 are in Nicobar group. Okay. Hope you are able to listen to me. Can anybody tell me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If you have any doubts, you can always raise your hands. You can ask me. So, if you look at the social history of these islands, the history of the growth and consolidation of free population, emergence of homogeneous community of the descendants. So, who are the people in Andaman today? What we call as Andaman society? Did this emerged because of the combination of two people, mainly the people who were branded as mutineers, convicts. They were all forced to go there and stay there. That is one group. And the second group, if it's after independence, in order to develop these islands further, free population from India was mainland India was sent there in the form of offering jobs, and all. Government of India sent those people. So you have free population and the descendants of these convicts who are there. Apart from these two groups, you have uh, homogeneous community, the tribal communities, the origins are also there. And interestingly, when we talk about Andamans, what comes to our mind is Andaman is full of tribes. Andaman is full of dangerous and backward tribal people, aborigines. But it's not exactly true. No doubt, there are six types of tribes. Four belong to Andamani group. That is the Great Andamanis. Their population is just 52 today. Because when British started their transportation, established their penal colony in Andamans, the worst sufferers were Andamanis. Because where British established their sites, the Andamani population, these great Andamanis were in large number, they were worst affected. And unfortunately, today their population is not more than 50 to 60 according to 2011 census. The second tribe is Sentinelese, which is around 63 kilometers from Port Blair in Sentinelese Island. They're totally cut off from the rest of the population, rest of the world, in fact. Perhaps this is the one only tribe, aborigine tribe in the world, which are still in prehistoric times. Still in prehistoric times. The third one is Onges. They are relatively developed. The Sentinel population is also not more than 60 to 65. And the Onges are there in Little Andaman. There is another island where they are there. Their population is also around 300 to 400, not more than that. And Jarawas, well known because they are adjacent to Port Blair city. That's the reason these people are worst affected because of the onslaught of civilization. Or so-called civilized people, they have degraded their culture, they have degraded their food habits, their dress habits. We actually encroached into their space. That's the reason Jarawas are considered as the, as of now, worst affected Andaman aborigine tribe. So these are the four tribes. Their population is also not more than 100. And Nicobaris, this is relatively, their population is around 30 to 40,000 people. This is the only community, rather, they got into civilization, they accepted the modern aspects, they got educated. Most of them are serving, many of them are serving in Andaman Nicobar administration. The other tribe is Shompane tribe. These are around 450 people. The last two tribes, Nicobaris and Shompanes, that you find them in Nicobar group of islands. So these two are Mongoloid races. These two are from the Mongoloid races because they are fair in color. Whereas the first four, Great Andamanis, Sentinelese, Onges, and Jarawas, they are from Negrito group. That's why they are dark in color. So four are Andamani group, four are Andamani tribes, two are Nicobari tribes. Okay. So before Andaman was established as a penal colony, from India, the British used to send people to Southeast Asian countries. The convicts were sent there. Bengal it's in Sumatra, and similarly Singapore and other strait settlements and all these places. People were sent from India. Convicts were sent from India. But what made the British, in fact, Mauritius also between 1815 to 1837, thousands of people from India were sent to Mauritius as indentured labor as well as convicts. But what made the British to establish Andamans as a penal colony that we are going to look at? Okay, emergence of Andaman as a penal colony. The first attempt was made by the British in 1789. That is the time French Revolution took place. Between 1789 to 1796, British established a settlement that was there only for 7 years. It had to be closed because of the ill health over there. But in the first penal settlement of Andaman, convicts were not taken there. Some few people from volunteered people from Bengal were taken there to establish a settlement. Basically, that time the intention of British in establishing this place as a settlement, it is to keep a safe place for their ships, because this is the only land available in Bay of Bengal while you are traveling from further towards Australia and all. That is the reason this was used seen as strategically an important place, and from trade maritime trade purpose also it was seen as an important place. And it was Lieutenant Archibald Blair. He was the one who started the first settlement. That's the reason the capital city of Andaman's headquarters is known as Port Blair. Okay, then the second settlement or the final settlement was opened after 1857 revolt. What was the reason? Because of 1857 revolt, two major problems occurred. Number one, the mutineers were seen very dangerous. The rebels who revolt against the British, they were seen very dangerous, and they are very provoking, instigating in nature. That is the reason the British wanted to send them to strait settlements, that is Southeast Asian countries. But by the time there, the transportation sites were already well established. They are already well established. They are doing very well. That was the reason. If these people were sent there, the social fabric would be disturbed, and that those people, this, the sepoys or who were caught, the rebels, they could instigate the local population against the government. That was the reason the governments in state settlement refused to accept these convicts. That is one reason. Second reason was prison crisis, because when East India Company expanded their territories in India, they hardly bothered about the expansion of administration. They hardly bothered about the spending money on the expansion of administration. So they did not, hardly they constructed jails. Subsequently, of course, they constructed. Otherwise, they used pre-British forts and palaces as jails. And during 1857 revolt, what happened? Most of these jails were destroyed by the rebels. Rebels targeted, because jail was seen as the symbol of British sovereignty, as the symbol of colonial power. That's the reason jail was attacked. So many jails were destroyed. So now the prison crisis started. Now what happened? The number of convicts increased, but number of available jails decreased. As a result, that led to prison crisis. So where will you keep these people? The people who are convicted, where will you keep them? For that, because of this one, the British had to open Andaman as a penal colony in 1858 with 200 convicts. The first ship came to Andamans to restart the penal settlement. Okay, that is how. So it is so terrific for a convict. It is so terrific because uh, the convict, as long as he is in the jail within his known territory, it may not make much difference in his life. But knowing the fact that he is taken away from his motherland, his language, everything that is known to him, everything that is connected to him, he is taken away from there, and he is taken away to a faraway place. Everything is unknown to him. So he lost his identity. That is what it all started with the convict ship itself. When these people were transported on ships to Andamans, in the ship itself, he lost his identity. The convict ship was an unknown transport apparatus to the Indian convict, in which he alienated from his land, language, religion, kith and kin, and himself. Their journey across the sea was itself a punitive punishment mechanism. It was almost 10 days journey. The travel itself is a very great big punishment for the convict. And as they utilized to an optimum level, knowing very well that for a Hindu, crossing the sea is a sin and lose his caste status. That is the reason Hindus strongly believe, Orthodox Hindus believe that if a Hindu crosses the sea, he loses his caste identity. That's the reason in Andaman, caste is not there. Where people are given OBC status, people are given ST status, not based on caste, it's because based on the time they stayed there. So it is the only place in India where you are given a reservation not based on caste. So after 1857 uprising, this is how before the convict reached Andaman shores, he was already psychologically defeated. He completely surrendered to the penal system much before he got out of the ship. And of course, he lost his caste and religious status because, irrespective of your caste background, all convicts are kept at one place. They were all made to sleep together. They were all made to eat same food, drink same water. So the caste identity was totally eliminated. Okay, then this is how convicts were divided, and their labor was used to develop the Andamans. Convicts were divided into division. In a division, there are three people. One is divisional gangsman, is a leader, and free overseer, another leader, and a native doctor. We call him as Vaidya, native doctor, not a British doctor. This doctor job is to take care of the health of the prisoners. And further, each division was divided into three subdivisions that was headed by a subdivisional gangsman. And all these people are convicts only. Remember, these divisional gangsmen, free overseer, okay, not native doctor, but free overseer, divisional gangsmen. These are all convicts who have got better behavior. Those people are given this leadership. And further, subdivision was divided into a section. In every subdivision, there are four sections. In a section, there are 25 people. That was every section was led by section gang. So in a subdivision, you have 100 people. In a division, you have 400 people. In one division, you have 400 people. That is how British very meticulously, calculatively, they have divided the manpower and got their work done in developing these islands. Okay, now a convict is known by the crime he committed. He is not known by his name. He is known by a number. Every convict is a given number. I'll show you that. So the task of keeping in control a large number of desperate characters with criminal instinct was very challenging for the administration. That's the reason they have divided these convicts into different parts. The creation of disciplinary gangs, all involving degradation, either on account of bad character, on arrival, or while in the settlement. Okay, they all came to Andaman as convicts, but if they had they uh, carried out any further, what do we say, crime, they were further punished there. 4 or 5 people are chained together, and they're supposed to work as a chain gang. That was the worst form of punishment. The chain gang, the tenure of chain gang punishment is not part of their overall punishment. That is on and above. Okay, crime based on their attitude, based on their behavior. They were divided into different groups, like cellular jail prisoner, Viper Island disciplinary. Viper Island is around 20 kilometers from cellular jail. It is a different island where the dangerous criminals were kept there. Similarly, Chatham Island disciplinary, that is another island, 4 or 5 kilometers from Port Blair. And chain gang, already I have explained. Habitual criminal gang. There are criminal gangs whose profession is robbery and crime. So those people, unnatural crime gang, those who are not involved in unnatural activities, and doubtful people, criminals with doubtful character, they were given D rank. So the D ticket comes about in which tell the expert all about them. And the ticket is the convict's number. I'll show you this. Oh, we have a picture. I'll show you there. So the prisoner, when he leaves, uh, when he comes to Andaman, he had to go through three stages. He would the moon as soon as he comes to Andaman, he is kept in third class, and based on his behavior, after a few years, he is promoted to the second class. After staying in second class for a few years, then he is promoted to the first class, or also called as also called as free individual. Free individual means he will be given a piece of land in Andamans where he can cultivate the land, he can have his own life, family, but he is not allowed to leave the islands. That is a free individual. What that position is given only after observing your behavior for about 10 years, 20 years, then only you are promoted to the first class. That is how in penal colonies a proper social hierarchy was made by the British. Okay. Then comes to another aspect of our. Initially, Andaman was an open jail till 1896. In 1858, penal colony was established. For almost 40 years, it was just open jail because the convict cannot go anywhere. It's anywhere you have to go. The nearest land that some convict wanted to touch is Burma. It is around 300 kilometers. The mainland India is about 1200 kilometers. So there was no question that convict could run away. Attempts were made. That also we will see, but they realized that the mainland is much far away from these islands. That is the reason there is no chance for uh, going out, running away. But of course, after 40 years, because you when you stay at one place, you develop some kind of affinity with the place. You start accepting that place and enjoying that place. So the people who were sent there in 1858 and subsequently, they accepted that place. Convict marriages were done. Convicts, both women were also transported there. Convict marriages were held. So people started leading their life. As a result, that sense of fear, that sense of what we call is that they are undergoing punishment, that is slowly withering away. That is the reason British came out with the idea of establishing a jail within the jail. That is, with that, this idea of cellular jail was born. Cellular jail is based on Jeremy Bentham's idea of panopticon. It is circular in shape. I'll show you the pictures. The features of a cellular jail or panopticon, this round structured, circular structured building. The design is circular in shape. The living area of the prisoner in the jail called cell. These cells are divided by one another, and the prisoner is completely separated. Means the each cell is given to only one prisoner, and the prisoner cannot be in touch with another cell. The prisoner in the other cell, he cannot see him. That is how jail is constructed. And the position or the place of observation of the inspector was in the center of the building, that is known as central tower or watchtower. That also I'll show you the pictures. And each cell has a window, but the window is above the height of the prisoner. Normal, the height of the prisoner is 5 feet to 6 feet, but the window is around 8 feet high. It is only window is kept for a ventilation. Otherwise, the prisoner cannot the convict cannot use the window to see. Even if he jumps and see through the window, he only finds the wall of another wing of the jail, but he cannot see anything. Okay. And there are wings in the cellular jail. All wings are connected to the central tower. I'll show you the pictures. So, and interestingly, this panopticon structure idea is that nowadays we have CCTVs, but in those days there was no CCTVs. So the most essential ingredient of this design was seeing everything without being seen. It means the convict can be seen, but he doesn't know that he is being seen. Not knowing, it means the convict does not have any privacy. He is always under constant observation. He cannot move from his cell. He cannot move from his cell, and is constantly under observation by the inspector of the central tower. So this is the idea of panopticon, and the similar structure you find in jails and military establishments. Similar constructions are made where the headmaster or the principal, if he stands at one place, he should be able to see all the classrooms to maintain that discipline. So somehow the modern, rather 20th century, nowadays we have CCTVs. Of course, things changed a lot. Otherwise, 20th century, 19th century, schools, colleges, military establishments, jails, they all have the similar architectural design, more or less, where you observe but you don't know that you are being observed. Somebody observes you, but you don't know that you are being observed. So this is the map of cellular jail. This is central tower. I'll show you the pictures also. These are 7 wings. That's why it is known as hectagonal or panoptical structure, almost like a circular structure. This is the wing number 1. This is wing number 2. 3-story building, ground plus 2. 3-story building. This is 1. This is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But as on date, only these 2 are there. Wing number 1. Sorry. This is wing number 1, wing number 6 and 7. Only these 3 are there. The rest were demolished for various reasons. That also I'll explain. So all these, if you see, all these wings are connected to the central tower. The prisoner can get into his cell only through central tower, only through here. There is no other way to go to enter his cell. So that is how the prisoner could be controlled, his movements could be controlled. And the space between these wings is used for cooking purpose, for workshop, where prisoners were made to work here during daytime. And after 6 o'clock, they used to kept in the cell till morning. So this is the place for their work, and it is surrounded by a small boundary wall. Even prisoner escapes, where will he go? He cannot go anywhere. So this jail is there in presently Port Blair. It's no longer a jail, of course, but it is become a national monument today. So this is what I have explained about cellular jail. There are around 600 cells were constructed in 7 wings in 3 floors. 600 cells were constructed. It means at a time 600 convicts could be placed there. So after the construction of cellular jail, the construction started in 1896 and completed by 1906. But it took 10 years. The total cost of the jail was 5,17,000 rupees. Okay, the local material was used. Some material was brought from iron and all was brought from Burma by the British. And when a convict reaches Andamans, initially 6 months he is kept in cellular jail. It is like a probation for him. After staying for 6 months in cellular jail, he is shifted to another jail, which is around 10 kilometers from Port Blair, Mini Bay. There is a place called as now Naval Settlement is there. It is known as Associated Jail, where he is kept for another three months. Then after that, he is allowed to stay in the convict settlements. This was the procedure they followed. Whereas with the rise of revolutionary nationalism in India, many revolutionaries were sent to Andamans, but they were not allowed to stay in the penal settlement. They were all the time they were kept in Andamans cellular jail itself. This is the map of Port Blair. This is where exactly the cellular jail is located. This box is the place where cellular jail is located. As I told you, 4 wings have been destroyed. In that place, a hospital is constructed. It is the biggest hospital there. Okay, the rest is all water. Chatham Island, I said, this is one of the place where prisoners were kept. During the Second World War, when Japan attacked Andaman Nicobar Islands, this was the place that was worst affected. And this is the administrative block of cellular. It is entrance, and it's the this one and this one. Wings are there, and the rest are destroyed. If you see the size of these wings are not same. Some are short, some are long. It's because of the paucity of the place. Because of the place, some wings are bigger, some wings are smaller. Overall, around 600 cells are there. 1, 2, 3. Ground plus 2. 600 cells are there. This is workshops of convicts. So these are the pictures taken when the construction was going on. And this is this is the window I'm telling where the convict window is given, but he cannot see through the window comfortably. He has to literally jump to see through window. Even if he jumps and see through the window, he would see only this, what you could see here. Only he would see this place. He cannot see anyone. Okay, that is the to give the pain of what we call as isolation. And this is the ground floor, and this is first floor, this is second floor. There is a grill, security grill, and the cell is inside the security grill. There is this a corridor. It is a corridor. It's around almost 6 feet width corridor. After that corridor, you have a cell like this, and this is the window I'm talking about. It is the height of the window is 8 feet. Literally, he has to jump, and when he jumps and sees, this is he could see this. That's all. Nothing else. Just imagine you are kept in an island, and within that island, you are kept in a jail, solitary confinement. What mental trauma the prisoners convicts must have gone through. That's the reason many people committed suicide also. And this is Central Tower. This is Central Tower. So from through the Central Tower only, you have staircases to first floor and second floor. And this is the watchtower. Here there is a bell. In case of emergency, the bell is rung, and this is the place where the inspector could take rounds. If he stands here, he could see all 7 wings. If he stands in any side of any floor, he could see. If he stands here, he could see all wings together. That is the idea of panopticon. And this is a workshop. There are some replicas were made. I have taken the pictures of those replicas. That also I'll show you. What kind of punishments that were given? This is interesting. In pre-industrial era, the body was used to punish, but after industrial revolution, the need of manpower increased. See, even the mechanism of punishment is also connected to the economic growth. Colonial mechanism of punishment is also connected to economic growth. That's the reason new punishment system was not to punish less. Punishment will be there, but you punish better. You punish in such a way the punishment would help to contribute for expanding your economy. Okay, so punishments are also part of economic expansion. Colonial punishments are also part of economic expansion. So the medieval punishments like pillory, scaffold, branding, dragging, all these things were given up. The body was to be minimum. The aim of the modern punishment, colonial punishment mechanism, was to avoid the touching the body to loss least as possible as much. Of course, it was the punishing body was punishment to body was used only in time in extreme circumstances. Otherwise, body was used to make work and contribute. His labor was used for contribution to develop the economy. So imprisonment, forced labor, penal servitude, deportation, etc. became these new ingredients. These are the colonial methods of punishment. So these new physical penalties, though affected the body, were not like previous punishment. Previous medieval punishment mechanisms were cutting off your limbs of your body, tongue, eyes, but these are of no use. That is taking away his body limbs would not contribute anything. Taking off of his life would not contribute anything for the state. That's the reason the colonial rulers came out with the new methods of punishment according to the new requirements of the economy. There were 3 types of punishment that were given to the people in Andamans. The first one is punishments through dishonor. This was generally given to women punish, transferring their heads. Their heads are shaved. Uh, this is one punishment. And by inflicting injury, this is a punishment where whipping, flogging, whipping, uh, where the I'll show you the picture. The convict was made to stand on on a stand. He was tied there on his back. After a medical doctor certifies on his back, at the most he will be given at a time not more than 30 whips, 30 whips or flogging. And after the construction of cellular jail, solitary confinement. If any convict is violating the norms of the penal colony, violating the norms of the rules and regulations, he was solitary confinement. He was kept in the prison, cellular jail for months together. This is the ticket. The convict is known by the number that is written on the ticket that is hanging around his neck. So this is his convict number, and by the section of IPC by which he was convicted, and years of imprisonment, 25 years. Okay, and these dates, these are the date of coming and date of release. Okay, there are two types of tickets: iron tickets and wooden neck tickets. So when the punishment starting date and when he is going to complete his punishment. So these tickets are every prisoner is supposed to hang these tickets around his neck, and this is called as kolu. In rural India, you see that bullocks are used to bullock takes round around this one where the oil is produced, coconut oil or okay. But here the convicts were used to do this job in the cellular jail, and these are the three types of chains where convict was chained: crossbar fetters. Okay, in case of violating the norms of the penal colony, these are the through three ways they are convicted. They are chained, and this is punishment dress. See, Andaman is basically a coastal area, and the heat is very high. This is the type of dress that convict is supposed to wear when he is undergoing the punishment. It's a rough jute was used to make this dress, and wearing this dress itself is a kind of punishment. And this is I'm talking about whipping. The picture is not very clear. This is where the convict is made to wear a small cloth around his private parts, and the total body is bare, and he was made to stand and rather tied on a stand, and whipping was done. uh, Flogging or whipping, we call it as 30 whips at a time at the most. That 31 whip itself is very painful, and imagine 30 whips, what must have happened with the convict. Okay, then, so if this is the type of punishment, how these convicts reacted, that we are going to look at. Just how these convicts reacted, that is what we are going to look at. When first time the convicts were brought to Andamans, they thought, yes, from here we can run away, not a big deal. So they made uh, attempts to run away from Andaman Nicobar Islands, but not knowing how far they had to. Some people tried to swim also, but some of them died. Some of them were caught by aborigines and killed, and those people who were caught by the administrators, penal administrators, they were punished. So ultimately, they realized that escaping from islands is not, it is next to impossible, and they accepted and continued to live. And the one major reaction by convict was the assassin of Lord Mayo. Mayo was the governor general. He was the only governor general who was assassinated in Andamans around 1875 by Sher Ali, a convict known as Sher Ali. He was from undivided Pakistan, undivided India. He was from there. On a murder case, he was transported to Andamans, and he was working in Andamans as a barber. He was all normal. There was a story about him. He was all normal, but all of a sudden, when Lord Mayo visited islands for inspection, the same day he attacked him, and with a knife he killed him. After that, of course, Sher Ali, within 2 days, the very next day, he was hanged by the Britishers. Otherwise, with the coming of political prisoners, a kind of political resistance started by Barindranath Ghosh, Barinder Kumar Ghosh, Vijay Kumar Sinha, V.D. Savarkar, Ganesh Savarkar. All these people were there because they were all brought here as political prisoners, but they were treated worse than ordinary convict. That's the reason for political to have the facilities or privileges that a political prisoner should have in mainland jails. The similar uh, what do we say privileges they demanded there, that led to a lot of fastings on death uh, by the prisoners. But ultimately, British were able to suppress the reactions, resistance by the convicts. But it doesn't mean that convicts did not resist. Convicts did not fight. They made all their efforts to fight against the penal settlement. But unfortunately, the penal administration was so strong, they could comfortably suppress any kind of such rebellious attitude of the convicts. Okay, and finally, during World War II, when England and Japan were loggerheads against each other, Japanese occupied these islands. In fact, they attacked and occupied. Temporarily, the British administration was eliminated from Andamans for some time. 1942 they occupied. That was the time Subhash Chandra Bose visited these islands, met with local people, and finally in 1945 the British were able to reoccupy these uh, Andaman Nicobar Islands. So when Japan attacked, that was the time they attacked the cellular jail also. Some buildings were destroyed. Otherwise, in 1941, this was a huge earthquake. Because of that earthquake, three wings of cellular jail was destroyed, and one more was in dilapidated condition. And in that place, hospital was constructed. So in 1945, the British were able to reoccupy these islands, but after that, they decided to close this colony, transportation colony. This was the last colony in the world, last penal colony in the world that was closed. 1945, it was closed. By that time, there were around 14,000 people in Andamans who were convicts. Out of them, they were all given pardon. They were all asked to leave Andaman and go. But out of that, only 2,400 people only agreed to leave these islands and go back to their mainland, because after staying here for 30 years, 40 years, they found there was no point in going back to mainland to meet their kith and kin. There's a reason majority of the people preferred to stay back in Andamans, and those descendants, those people are known as pre-42 settlers in Andamans. So this is, I'm sure, you got some idea, some understanding about the establishment of penal colony in Andamans. There is another topic. If time, if I get a chance in future, I'll talk about how Andamans emerged, developed by the Indian government after 1947. That subsequently we can see. So with this, I rest my presentation. If you have any doubts, you can ask me. And I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Suresh for giving me such a wonderful opportunity to interact with such young, energetic students. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your nice presentation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
If anybody has doubt, please ask. Is Shan Malaviya Vinny is Miss Malaviya Vinny?
Hello, sir. Am I
Yes,
audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
I have no doubt, but I have only to congratulate you because it was a sleepless 1 hour and 2 minutes. Such a nice presentation.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you so much. So nice of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Had it been face-to-face interaction, this would have been a wonderful. I would have presented you many more photographs. The direct interaction would have been given better result than this technological interaction. Thank you, sir. May I leave the? May I leave now? Okay, sir. Thank you very much.
Shibili?
Sir,
So please, Mr. Person to what of thanks?
hello, sir. Okay, so I invite first MA History student Archa to deliver vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. It has been such an honor to be part of this wonderful event. On the behalf of History Department, University College, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guest, Dr. G.S.C. Prasad, Department of History, National Defense Academy. Thank you, sir. Sincere thanks to HOD Dr. Suraj, University College, and other teachers who acted as the pillar of this event. Finally, I would like to thank each one of you for making this event the best. Thank you.
9, 8, 9, 5, 3, 7, double 9, double 7,
സെക്ഷൻ തീർന്നു, മറ്റേ സെക്ഷൻ തീർന്നു.
5, 1. 9, 8, 9, 5, 3, 3, 7.
So 5 minutes next session will start. Please wait. ജോയിൻ ചെയ്യുമോ? അടുത്ത സ്വാഗതം പറയാൻ വേണ്ടി ജോയിൻ ചെയ്യണം. മളവിൽ വന്നു ഉറപ്പാക്കിയിട്ട് കയറിയില്ല, ഇപ്പൊ കയറും തീർച്ചയായും. ഓക്കെ, താങ്ക് യു. മിസ് മാളവിക, മാളവിക മാം. Mohammad Shibili. Mohammad Shibili.
Yes, sir.
Okay. We start the session.
We are starting the next section. I kindly invite Sri Secretary, Assistant Professor of Department of History, to welcome Dr. Malavika Bindi.
Okay. Good afternoon, one and all, respected teachers, dear colleagues, and my dear students. I am very happy to invite Dr. Malavika Bindi, Assistant Professor and Head, Department of History, Kannur University, as the resource person of the section. An eminent young budding scholar in the field of history, she presenting her views and thoughts on the topic Another Freedom, Another Colonialization, and Another Struggle, interrogating the intersections of the social reform and national movement in Kerala. I welcome Dr. Malavika to handle the section. Welcome, ma'am, and also welcome. Invite all the participants. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, I think there's a little. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes,
ma'am.
Okay. Sorry, I couldn't hear you, but thank you for the warm welcome. My paper today is about though the seminar is on the idea of the freedom struggle in Kerala, as well as memorable moments in it, as well as the darkness of colonialism. In fact, it seems to be a very poetic title. Usually in academic seminars, we do not see such titles, but I think there's something important that needs to be stated about the title, which is the idea of darkness associated with the idea of unfreedom or the idea of serfdom, because often it is this walking towards the light or walking towards clarity that is also understood as freedom. So it is also an idiom that is often borrowed from the Judeo-Christian understanding of freedom, which is often conflated with the idea of spiritual freedom. So in the realm of language, there are these addendums and there are these metaphors and other use, or rather let's call all of that as usages that we use to refer to this freedom of to this state of enslavement, and by extension to the movement away from enslavement, i.e. freedom. But then freedom has also been understood in a rather restrictive manner, particularly when we're looking at the Indian national movement. And from, let's say, the UG classes or even before that, freedom is very narrowly understood as political freedom, particularly in our discipline of history. In fact, if you take into consideration the 1936 undelivered speech of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he starts with defining freedom and makes it extremely clear that political freedom without social freedom will have no meaning. And social freedom is a concept which cannot be divorced from the idea of inequality. And herein, our idea of freedom has to be expanded, not just to the realm of social freedom, but also to the realm of cultural freedom, which is something that I will be trying to explicate in this particular paper, which I have titled as Another Freedom, Another Colonialism, and Another Struggle, interrogating the interstices of social reform and national movement in India. So it will not be only restricted to Kerala, though we will be looking at social reformers and their conceptions of freedom from Kerala. For instance, we will be looking at the conception of freedom by Poigail Yohanan. We will also be looking at the conception of freedom of Sri Narayana Guru as well as Vagbhatananda. So often when we look at conceptualizing freedom, and I am borrowing heavily from Geologius's idea of what is to be free, which and of course there is this very recent work by Avijit Pathak on the idea of being free to produce, particularly being free to produce knowledge. So freedom can be refracted in multiple ways. It is not only to be restrictively understood as political freedom. So if you look at Foucault's ideas about freedom, one sees that Foucault often employs the idea of freedom in opposition to the idea of agency being curtailed by the system. For instance, the freedom to have relationships with whosoever one wants to, the freedom to exercise self-will, the freedom to determine one's social or cultural positioning. These are the kinds of freedoms that Foucault looks at. So if you look at Foucault's history of sexuality and later at Foucault's works on power knowledge or subject knowledge, Foucault constantly talks about the issue of subjectification, that whether we are living in a pre-colonial society or we have transitioned to a post-colonial society, or whether we are living at the cusp of capitalism where feudalism is breaking up, or whether we have transitioned towards capitalism and whether we're moving to the post-capitalistic society, what we see is the yearning towards freedom on the one hand, but on the other hand, the state is also forever expanding. So the state's grasp over the subjects, the state grasp over what it considers to be its own jurisprudence is constantly expanding. Just like we say that the universe is constantly expanding, more and more realms of human life are brought under the state. And this phenomena, of course, I will not be able to explain the extent and the purview of what Foucault calls as biopower and how the process of subjectification is understood by Foucault in this particular lecture. But this concept of subjectification, of how subjects are produced by the state and how a certain kind of consent of being governed, of being surveilled, or of being controlled, of being disciplined is thrust on the populace, and that certain kind of an imposition on people where a certain set of their freedom, certain set of their rights are taken away by the government is understood to be appropriate, is understood to be legitimate. This whole process is referred to as the process of subjectification by Foucault. Now, as a historian, it is very difficult for us to take a stand and look at this huge process of subjectification if we are constraining ourselves to just 50 years or 60 years or small slices of time. But if we look at large slices of time, such as the early modern period, or if we look at the post-Renaissance period, or in the case of India, if we look at the transition from the early modern period to the period of colonial modernity, one can actually map out that the creation of the subject or the transformation of the individual into a state citizen, it was one of the projects of modernity. And this project was achieved not just through laws, not just through the process of juridico-legal bureaucracies being made, On the other hand, you also have a process of regulating people, of disciplining people through the process of, or through what is often mislabeled as, and I'm not sure whether a lot of my fellow historians will agree with this term mislabeling, but what has been mislabeled, particularly from a subaltern perspective, mislabeled as social reform. Of course, feminist historians like Tanika Sarkar has often pointed out that what is often dubbed as social reform is not exactly social reform, but it refers to a set of practices wherein a new kind of femininity and a new kind of masculinity is fashioned. So it was actually the extraction of a set of traditional values and or a distillation of traditional values which were thought to be appropriate for the modern times, being infused with what was understood as modern values of liberalism, of secularism, of a certain very restricted idea of equality that led to the new subject, the new citizen subject being formed. So when one looks at the Indian national movement and when one tries to place the social reform movements which happened both in South India and North India at an earlier date, uh, and South India at a much later date, much more closer to us. When we look at both these processes, what we see is that one cannot actually disassociate the social reform movements from the nationalist movement. The shaping of the citizen happened during the nationalist movement, but at the same time, you also have the shaping of the citizen also uh, also happening during the social reform. Please give me 2 minutes. Sorry for the interruption. So the shaping of the modern citizen, or the idea of the ideal citizen, happened not only through the national movement where you have secularism replacing religiosity, where you have duty towards the state or duty towards the nation, or in other words patriotic ideals replacing one's the affinity towards one's tribe, affinity or loyalty to the king. So there's a lot of substitution which is happening, or a lot of overhauling and replacement which is happening. But this is not only happening in the political realm, it is also happening in the social realm. So without the set of movements which are dubbed as social reform movements happening in the late 18th century, early 19th century till the 20th century, maybe this idea of the citizen might not have reached where it has arrived today. And if you look at the works of Gopal Guru, particularly in the Broken Mirror, he argues that what we have as citizenship today in India is a very fragmented citizenship, where the idea of the citizen is not a concrete idea. Rather, it is an idea which is fragmented by various kinds of identities. So you have one's gender identity, one's caste identity, one's tribal identity, one's the identity which is associated to one's sexual orientation, so on and so forth. And then you have an overarching Indian identity. So you have an umbrella identity which sort of shields or covers various other kinds of broken, shattered, fragmented identities, which are some of which are not even fully formed, some of which are in the process of being made. And it is this thread which has woven together all the fragments of all the multiple fragments of identity that we refer to as nationalism. And when we use this idea of nationalism, in many ways, the idea of the nation or nationalism becomes a very amorphous entity where you're not able to pinpoint one particular process or one particular kind of feeling and refer to it as nationalism. In fact, the idea of the Indian nation has been refracted in multiple ways by the multiple kinds of leadership that we have had in the national movement. For instance, Gandhi's ideas of the nation, which was in many ways highly influenced by the idea of the Ramarajya. And Ramarajya being a place where righteousness reigned, where truth would have no value because nobody lies, where farce would not even exist, which means that righteousness again will have no value. So it's of course this idea of a utopia which is based on moral philosophy. In fact, Judith Butler has referred to this as the making of a new kind of a moral economy. So you have that conception of the nation, and on the other hand, you have the conception of the nation by Nehru, where Nehru is building the nation on the basis of what can be or what has been termed by Akhil Bilgrami as a new scientificity or a certain narrow understanding of what can be termed as scientific rationale. So that's another idea of the Indian nation. Now, if you look at Abdul Kalam Azad's writings, you will see that he too had an idea of India, and this India was in many ways based on the traditional India, and not just any traditional, any idea of a traditional India, but one which was wrote on elite values, and these elite values included erudition. It also included ideas of sophistication, ideas of being a connoisseur to various kinds of arts. It included the idea of the nation being a place where multiple kinds of histories and multiple kinds of narratives could coexist together. But all the narratives that Azad talks about are narratives of the elite. Now, you will not find a mention of tribal, or you would not find the mention of a person from a Dalit background when you go through the readings of Nehru or Azad, because this is also based on this new phenomena of modern science and the particular way in which it was understood by the leaders of the Indian National Congress. But if you look at Gandhi's writings, there is a certain acknowledgement of oppression, and not just a political oppression by the British, but also social oppression through the practice of untouchability. He takes a much more kinder stand when it comes to Chaturvarna or the caste system. But there are also these references to caste system, particularly in his later writings, suggesting that he also understood the extent of the oppression that is caused by the caste system. In fact, a lot of his interventions in South India, whether it is coming to Kerala and meeting with Sri Narayana Guru, or him playing an indirect effective part in the Vaikam Satyagraha, the support given by the International Congress to the Guruvayur Satyagraha, all of this points to the fact that when it comes to South India, the kind of intervention that was made even by national leaders was definitely through the social sphere. So it is in this context that one also needs to look at the concept of freedom and how freedom was understood by I mean, this term social reformers is a very problematic term for me to use, because I constantly think why we have this separation between a set of people who are referred to as freedom fighters, and then you have another set of people being referred to as social reformers. So where do we draw the line between people who engaged in the international movement and people who engaged in social reform? Because quite often we see a lot of overlap in terms of the people who were particularly the followers who were involved in the social reform movement. They were also very engaged in the national movement. The people who participated in the anti-caste movements in North Kerala, for instance, in Malabar, for instance, were also the people who would also participate in, let's say, the Payanur Satyagraha. So there is this overlap that you see when it comes to the masses. There is also a certain overlap when you look at the evidence of again, very lauded term, but one can maybe use the term the lesser known leaders such as Moraliyathu Shankaran. Maybe so when you look at these characters, what you or if you look at the character of Sri Devi, teacher, again prominent figure in and around Kannur and Mahi, who again participated in the freedom struggle as well as anti-patriarchal, anti-Brahmanic caste struggles. So in terms of the leadership and in terms of the mass following, you do see an overlap. Again, when you look at the concept of freedom also as social freedom, then all these sets of leaders who are reductively referred to as social reformers, whether it is Ayyangali, whether it is Vagbhadananda, whether it is Sri Narayana Guru, whether it is Poigel, Sri Guru Devan, if you are expanding your definition of freedom as social freedom as well, they should also be referred to as freedom fighters. But we can also argue for the vice versa, where one can also look at Gandhi also as a social reformer. You can also look at Nehru as a social reformer, because they were also fighting against superstition, or what was understood as superstition. They were also fighting against untouchability. They were also fighting for basic rights such as that of the right to use water without tax, the right to produce salt without tax, all of which had caste connotations as well. So this kind of a separation of leadership following as well as movements into social reform movements and national movements or social reform movements or freedom struggle movements, this kind of a compartmentalization that one has, I think it's high time that we do away with it. So on the one hand, this entire paper is a theoretical inquiry into how freedom can be understood, or if, as Angela David puts it, as whether we can ever understand what freedom is at all. For instance, she argues that when we look at the concept of freedom, it is often thought of as moving people to a better space, to a space where they can take decisions on their own. So then what would be the difference between agency and freedom? This is one of the questions that she poses. She also says that even if you're thinking of this ideal space where people can move to, or a restructuring of the present or pre-extent system into a new system where people can exercise their will, isn't the will itself preconditioned? Aren't there a priori structures such as that of one's identity, such as that of one's historical and geographical location, that determines the decisions that will be taken by one, or the exercise of willpower to answer. But of course, from a philosophical standpoint, one can also argue that there has been a constant yearning of moving more and more towards freedom. In fact, when Marx talks about all history being the history of class struggle, Marx is actually pointing towards a situation where people are constantly moving towards a situation where they will be free from the yokes of authorities controlling their lives. So, in fact, the whole of history is understood by Marx as a movement towards freedom. And often we hear this addendum that no, freedom is completely free, that we are constantly in chains. On the other hand, there is a grand narrative which is cast history as the process of human struggle and human struggle towards the acquisition of freedom. But clearly, when we look at freedom as something that has to be acquired from outside, or if we look at freedom uh, as an element which is to be fought and won over from an external agent or a body, that again leads us to understanding freedom only from the rights based approach, where freedom is understood to be a set of rights that can be granted to a people, that can be granted to a nation, that can be granted to a set of individuals by a higher authority who might have kept them in enslavement. But Foucault refers to freedom as a practice. And what kind of practice is freedom according to Foucault? It is a practice of positive resistance. So the practice of freedom, according to Foucault, is intimately associated with what he refers to as the ethics of the self. The self is not independent as the system constantly fashions it, but the individual can participate in the process of the shaping of the self by constantly being engaged in not just the critique of the system, but also being engaged in practices of determination. So it could be a determination of the political conditions in which the self is molded. It could also refer to restructuring the a priori mechanisms which produce the self. So, in many ways, when Foucault talks about freedom, he is referring to freedom as a freedom to critique, a freedom to dismantle, freedom to challenge the system. But this does not mean that we understand Foucault in a very vulgar postmodernist manner. In fact, if we look at Foucault's later writings, one would see that Foucault looks at freedom through three different frameworks. One is the one where he talks about the concept of negative freedom.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Where he talks about the absence of an external agency impinging on your rights. For instance, it might not just
Excuse me, ma'am. Genojibe, please mute.
Can I continue?
Yes, ma'am.
So it might not only be okay, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, start again. So Foucault looks at three or conceives of freedom in three different ways.
Cannot hear.
One way in which he understands freedom is by looking at freedom as freedom from an external domination or external influence, which he refers to as being a negative kind of freedom. Now, this might not only refer to foreign domination, but this might also be a reference to, let's say, authority that is imposed on the individual by the family, by society, by certain kind of social discourses, so on and so forth. But any kind of external encroachment on one's rights, one's privacy, one's life, it was understood to be unfreedom, and the removal of the same or the annihilation of the same was to be understood as freedom, but a very negative kind of freedom. Now, Foucault also looks at freedom through the concept of reflective freedom, where he argues that reason and freedom are twin brothers or are twin sisters or are to be understood as the same. So, freedom from a certain kind of tradition which does not let which do not let you think critically, that is also understood as unfreedom. So when Foucault looks at the age of reason, what Foucault sees is that there is a certain kind of flowering of human freedom, where there is this incessant questioning of what was understood to be dogmatic, what was understood to be the traditional ritual knowledge, which was reinforced by multiple mechanisms of feudalism and through the workings of the church. So, this movement towards reason or the dawning of the age of reason is understood by Foucault as the dawning of freedom as well. But the third kind of freedom, now, this usually when you have three sets of ideas put forth, one kind of assumes that the third one would be the ideal. But in Foucault's writings, you do not see that. What you see is that when he talks about the third idea of freedom, he talks about social freedom. Very, very similar to Ambedkar's idea of social freedom, where social freedom is inextricably linked to the idea of equality. But Foucault also argues that when one looks at the idea of social freedom, it refers to the creation of a ideal society or a quote unquote good society. But then Foucault is also very cautious when he uses this term of social freedom. He argues that there is this possibility of social freedom becoming a new kind of power discourse. So, for instance, if you look at Fanon's writing, where Fanon points out that the new states which emerged as results of the of the colonial struggle, a lot of the post-colonial states in Africa, in Latin America, and Asia, they behaved in a manner which was very similar to the to British imperialism or French imperialism or the modalities of the functioning of power remained pretty much the same. In fact, borrowing upon Gramsci's writing, Bipan Chandra has argued that what emerged uh, in the Indian context, what has been referred to as the Indian national struggle, can also be understood as a struggle which led to the establishment of the bourgeois state. But Fanon also goes one step further and says that it is not just a bourgeois state, but it is also a state into which the power codes of traditions were embedded. So it was very hard for this newly emergent state, which in fact was an elitist bourgeoisie state, to also distance itself from tradition, which also meant that there was a recasting of traditional ideas of inequality and traditional ideas of power into the language or into the sophisticated language of secularism, into the language of the republic. Now, if we have a dilution of this, if we have at least a small space of dissent that has been created, a small space of the possibility of the critique of the government, the critique of authority, having also been created with the dawn of the republic, that is thanks to the social reform movement. Because during the social reform movements, the idea of equality, not just political equality, but cultural and social equality, was 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 thrust forward very, very forcefully by those along the likes of Mahatma Phule, by Ambedkar, by Ayangali, by Poigel Yohanan, and literally hundreds of other social reformers. And if this set of ideals were not put forth, then we would have an even more constrained idea of what freedom is, and by extension what citizenship is. So if we look at the ideas of freedom as put forth by social reformers of the early 20th century, see in the case of the south of the Indian as a continent, we do see that it was not just the freedom to worship or the freedom to exercise religion that was being demanded and garnered by movements like that of the SNDP movement under Sri Narayana Guru, or that of the PRDS movement under Poigel Yohanan. For instance, if you look at Poigel Yohanan, so several of Poigel Yohanan's poems, you would see that there is this idea of the slave being released, uh, which becomes a sort of trope in his writings. It is though he uses a very Christian and biblical imagery, uh, the ideas that are put forth by Poigel Yohanan constantly talks about the removal of chains that binds one. He talks about the Adima Nugam, or the yoke of slavery. He talks about bodies and chests and stomachs being corseted. He talks about people being treated like cattle. He talks about Aryas and Dravidas, and how Dravidas were conquered and won over by the Aryans, and he talks about a certain kind of rule that was imposed on a set of people. So one can very clearly see that the these for the want of another word, the kind of literature that was produced as part and parcel of the PRDS movement or the SNDP movement was also heavily influenced not only by the nationalist struggle but also by this concept of freedom. They were, of course, refracting the idea of freedom through the prism of religion, and used religious idioms to put forth this idea. But freedom was also understood as the freedom to worship, as the freedom to praise God, or the freedom to comprehend divinity in very many different ways. So Poigel Gurudevan or Poigel Yohanan, for instance, in a writing of his, says this. So quoting verbatim from a translation of Poigel Apachan's songs by Ajay Shekhar from the work Unknown Subjects. From north and south, two feudal lords came. They put ropes around the neck of mom and dad. Children cried aloud and rushed to the sport. The eldest son realized that mom and dad are sold to the lords. He stared at them again and again. Mom grabbed the little son to her lap, fed it with her milk. With the breast milk, tears also dropped onto his tongue. This is the last milk that you're given. Drink it to fill your stomach, said she. The father took the second son and asked the elder one to collect some leftover rice from the hut. He came with some rotting rice from the bottom of a very old pot. The father rolled it into a small bowl and fed him and said, "Son, this is your last bowl of rice." Then to the elder one, "Son, father and mother are going. Look after yourself." He embraced them and wept. There was a huge cry. Infuriated came the lords hearing this. They chased away the children. They dragged the mother and father south and to the north. The mother looked back till the children went out of sight. So, and this is just one among the many poems, many songs that were composed by Poege Johanan, which talks about slavery, which talks about the cause of freedom. In fact, there's this beautiful poem titled as Dove, where he talks about the freedom that is experienced by a dog in terms of access, in terms of being able to move everywhere, as well as as well as the dog being able to make its sound audible to everyone. So the poem goes like this: in the creaks and cracks and nooks and cranny lived you, my little pretty dog. Oh, Meta Beauty, rise up with me. Come along quick and have a look. Show your face and make audible your sound. How sweet thy voice which rises up everywhere. Come along with me, come alongside. So there's this constant trope of freedom and slavery which you would see again and again being used in the hymns and as well as the songs which were composed by Poge Johanan. Similarly, in the writings of Narayana Guru, if you look at the poem called Ariva, he talks about the eye not being able to, the human eye not being able to see itself, and similarly one is not able to see the kind of yokes or to see the kind of chains that bind oneself. So even if one looks, again citing from Ariva, Narayana Guru's Ariva, which has been translated by myself. So even if you look at the mirror, what you see is not the eye. What you see is the representation or the reflection of the eye. So the eye now is seeing the reflection of the eye. And similarly, when human beings look at themselves through the eyes of others, the gaze itself is one that is determined by power. So one never experiences oneself because one is also not able to completely comprehend the layers of unfreedom that one is under, or is not able to comprehend the depth of slavery that one is under. Now, it is very easy to dismiss these verses or dismiss the general writings of the so-called social reformers as writings which only pointed or towards or indicate the presence of the divine and supernatural, or as writings which only talks about spiritual freedom and that of salvation. But you must also remember that they are also writing in the 1920s and 30s, which was a time where ideas of freedom were being constantly discoursed throughout not just Kerala but the whole of South India. This was also the time when the self-respect movement, the Dravida movement were happening. This was also the time when caste consolidation was happening throughout South India. So on the one hand, you have the national movement, and on the other hand, you have the Aikya Kerala movement happening. And along with both of these, you also have the various social reform movements which happened, which later on came to be referred to as the social renaissance in Kerala. Of course, I do have my issues with the term social renaissance. We'll come back to that later. So you have a climate of churning where various ideas about slavery, about spiritual slavery, about slavery to patriarchy, about slavery to caste, about slavery to British imperialism. So various ideas about slavery as well as various ideas of freedom and various modes of fighting colonialism, both colonialism of the mind, colonialism of the spirit, as well as colonialism of the subject category was being tried out. And that is where the freedom to worship, particularly the freedom to worship as a right that the so-called lower caste or the Avarna caste or the Dalit caste also has to have became rather important. Though we do not see multiple avenues of convergence in terms of events uh, with regard to the history of Kerala, where the social reform movement and the national reform movement converged. In terms of the history of ideas, or in terms of intellectual history, one can see that there are multiple convergences where there is this immense borrowing from the social reform movement and the national leaders using the vocabulary of the social reform movement, like the use of this imagery of the light and the dark. Usually, it is in the writings of the Bhakti movement, or in the writings uh, of uh, so-called saints from the 14th century onwards, that divinity is represented as light. But in the case of the nationalist struggle, you would see that both Periyar, who was an atheist, as well as Gandhi, who probably was a believer, both using the term light as a metaphor for freedom. And this freedom movement as a walk towards light from a space of darkness, where imperialism is now being understood as darkness. So in terms of language and idioms being borrowed, in terms of ideas being borrowed, in terms of uh, freedom being understood in multiple ways, and being cast as uh, as a set of rights which is to be achieved from an external agency. In this case, you have the British imperialists, but also as something which needs to be achieved by one's own through self-probing, and by trimming away certain kinds of characteristics which have come to be embedded in in Indian society. So you have multiple uh, kinds of freedoms, or conceptions of multiple kinds of freedoms interacting with, not just interacting with one another, but also uh, exchanging ideas, exchanging vocabulary, exchanging the kind of not just exchanging, sorry, and heavily impacting the discourse on freedom at this particular point of time. And uh, coming back to Foucault, all of this led to the creation of a new subject, or all of this uh, contributed to the production of what has been termed as the new citizenry. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Aparna?
Okay. If you have any doubts, please ask.
Good evening, everyone. In the name of the Department of History, University College, I thank you, Dr. Malavika Benny ma'am, for your cooperation in making the second technical section a resounding success. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, one and all.
Okay. Next session is conducted through new Google Meet link. The link is also shared in WhatsApp. The paper presenters will join the link. Thank you. Today's technical session is over.
please join the paper presentation link for the next session. Link is also provided on the this meet. So please join.